Hey gang, welcome back. Recently I saw a post on a message board. A young collector had some Edison Diamond Discs, and the paper label, the black and white label, had fallen off, revealing the blank craft label underneath, and he was wondering whether or not they might be test pressings. And of course, the labels fall off of Edison, so they weren't test pressings. But the response from a lot of the established collectors irritated me. They're kind of like, well, duh, they fall off, the labels do, so it's obviously not a test pressing. Kindness costs nothing. Don't be a jerk to younger collectors. Interestingly enough, one of the people who posted something that I thought was rather rude, later, like 3 pages down the thread, just offhandedly mentioned, you know what, I've never seen an Edison test pressing. Nice job, buddy. So, what I decided to do today is I figured out most people don't know what to look for. They wouldn't know an Edison test pressing if they saw it. So today we will remedy that on the 78 RPM channel. Hello, and welcome to the 78 RPM channel. Whether you're new to 78s or an advanced collector, this is your source for information, research, and music about 78 RPM records, cylinders, and radio transcriptions. Between 1912 and 1929, Edison Diamond Discs were the go-to discs if you like sentimental parlor ballads, schlocky art songs, or polite chamber music. Now, I know eventually some jazz and blues did appear on Edison Diamond Discs, but if you know anything about Thomas Edison, you will know that that music appeared on Diamond Discs more in spite of Thomas Edison as opposed to because of Thomas Edison. Enough of me making fun of Edison and his lack of good music on Diamond Discs. Let's get back to our subject at hand, identifying Edison Diamond Disc test pressings. To be fair, it can be tougher to identify an Edison Diamond Disc test pressing as opposed to a test pressing on another label. Once Edison began producing paper labels began to fall off, and they left behind a craft paper blank label underneath, kind of like this one. And yes, it looks a lot like it could be a test pressing. Now, I chose this one to show you because it has some of the original black and white label still intact, pointing out that the paper label blank underneath served simply as a base. I would also like to point out that the base will not fall off, whereas the black and white paper label, which stuck to that base, definitely will. Compare that to this disc, which is an Edison test pressing. They're very much the same thing, with the exception that this disc never had a black and white Edison label on top of the paper base. Now, there are 3 things that will help you identify this as a test pressing, and they are as follows. First of all, the blank label does not have a catalog number stamped into the disc. On this test pressing, you can see the matrix number through the paper, but there is no stamped catalog number. Second of all, and there's probably no way you're going to be able to see this, so I'll probably pop a picture up, but the edge of this disc was never rounded off or sanded off. It's very rough. It has an unfinished edge to it. The edges of finished discs were sanded flat, and they were very slightly rounded. They also occasionally had numbers stamped into the edge. The edge of test pressings definitely do not. And finally, this disc just has 2 takes of the same song on it. So this coupling was never issued. This is just take A on one side and take B on the other. So if you find an unissued coupling with an unfinished edge, those are pretty good indications that you may have a test pressing on your hands. So what about Edison Diamond Discs that were pressed without paper labels during the etched label era? Well, look for characteristics you don't normally see on commercially released discs. First of all, look for that unfinished edge. Secondly, look for couplings that were not released to the general public. For instance, the edge on this copy of Edison 50481 is not only unfinished, but this has a really interesting crimped circle around the edge. Now, in 1915, Edison started adding 4 gripper indentions on the edges of their disc. Presumably, this was to help prevent the edge from separating from the disc when it absorbed moisture. It would kind of separate and peel up. However, this disc has a full gripper ring around it, which I've never actually seen on an otherwise commercially issued disc by Edison. As I mentioned, one other way to identify discs that were not issued to the public, which are test pressings, is to look for unissued couplings, and this is one of those. This disc contains one side from Edison 50502 by Billy Murray, with the flip side being a side from the Classical and Opera series from 82553 by Thomas Chalmers. Now, the Etched labels don't have catalog numbers on them, and because this disc has an unfinished edge, that is really the first thing that got me paying attention to this disc. Only later did I find out it was an unissued coupling. One other thing that might be worth noting, there's a chance that this is technically not a test pressing. There were, especially in the very early days of Edison, records that were issued, they were pressed for jobbers and they were pressed as salesman samples that may have had unissued couplings on them. However, it should be noted, most of those were made very, very, very early, the first few numbers of the catalog. This disc is not one of those early catalog numbers, so I just have kind of assumed this is a test pressing. Even if it were one of those early jobber records, a lot of collectors just kind of lump those in with test pressings. One final thing to look for would be the blank label area. Because if you were in the process of doing a test pressing and you weren't sure if you were going to issue a record or not, going through the expense of having an etched label produced and of stamping that into a test pressing, it would have cost money, it would have cost time, things that Edison didn't really like to waste. Now, sometimes these have matrix numbers on them scratched into the part of the disc that would eventually be covered by an etched or paper label, kind of like this one. This is matrix number 6486, which is an unissued test. Or it could be etched into the traditional place on a diamond disc, which would be visible after the label was either applied or etched, like this copy of matrix number 7663, again, an unreleased Edison matrix. Now keep in mind, Edison did release some discs with spoken word explanatory talks on the second side of operatic and classical discs. Some of those were released with blank label areas. Those are not test pressings. Eventually, maybe Edison caught on to the fact that people didn't like a blank label area on the second side, and he had labels, both etched and paper, that were produced that have the words explanatory talk on them. And you will, however, find discs without that label on it. If it's on the flip side of a classical or operatic piece and it contains someone talking about the piece on the other side, it's not a test pressing, it's one of Edison's explanatory talks. We're going to conclude with a couple of things. If you are looking for Edison test pressings, the first thing you should look for is the unfinished edge. Most of, a vast majority, if not all, well, probably not all, but a vast majority of Edison test pressings do have the unfinished edge. I've tried to show you, here are a couple more pictures. An unfinished edge has a ridge, a raised ridge that goes around the middle of the edge, and it also has very sharp edges. Again, as most Edison discs, the edge or the ridge would have been filed off and the edges would have been rounded. Test pressings are not that way. Now, like any test pressing, what you really want to find, unreleased material. You find unreleased material, then you've got something that really maybe no member of the general public has ever heard, and that's kind of cool for collectors. So what we're going to do is I am going to conclude today's episode with an unreleased Edison song. One fun thing about Edison Diamond Discs is that the entire Edison catalog has been released into the public domain. So if you have Edison discs, you may feel free to record your disc and post copies of your disc with absolutely no fear of any legal repercussions whatsoever. The disc I'm going to play for you was recorded in January of 1918, and it was recorded by a gentleman named Marion Slaughter. You probably know him better as Vernon Dalhart. This is a song called Ding Dong, and not a great tune, maybe one of the reasons it was not released, but it is an unreleased Edison test pressing. In addition to being an unreleased song by Vernon Dalhart, this is one of the few Edison discs I have not been able to confirm exists at the Thomas Edison National Historic Park. And so there is a chance that this doesn't even exist in New Jersey at the Edison place. I hope you enjoyed this quick primer into Edison Diamond Disc test pressings. We're going to listen to Vernon Dalhart here in just a second, but in the meantime, keep looking for records, keep digging for records, and when you find Edison's, start by looking for that unfinished edge around the outside. If you find one of those, do some research. You may have found an Edison test pressing. We'll see you next time on the 78 RPM channel. All I have to do now is get this little on-air light to flip on and off on cue. We'll see if I can figure that out. Here's some Vernon Dalhart.
I'm so happy today, things are coming my way. There's a wonderful reason why I'm feeling so gay. Now you never will guess, so I better confess why I'm so happy. Mama Linda said yes. Ding dong, ding dong, hear them joy bells ring, ting-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. My little Lindy whispered in my ear, set that date, honey, don't you wait, and ever since all I can hear am joy bells chime. I've had my fortune read, and here's what the gypsy said: you're gonna be happy for a long, long time. Come and follow the crowd, everybody's allowed. Come and look at the reason why I'm feeling so proud. She's a picture to see, just as nice as could be. A bunch of sweetness made to order for me. Ding dong, ding dong, hear them joy bells ring, ting-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. My little Lindy whispered in my ear, set that date, honey, don't you wait, and ever since all I can hear am joy bells chime. I've had my fortune read, and here's what the gypsy said: you're gonna be happy for a long, long time.